She's just a cook. What could she possibly know about combat logistics? One officer muttered, loud enough for everyone in the briefing room to hear. Heads turned. A few snickers followed. At the far end of the table, a middle-aged woman in a grease-stained kitchen uniform stood holding a small stack of papers. Her posture was straight, her eyes clear, but her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the food-stained apron around her waist. She wasn't supposed to be here. At least, that's what they thought. Sergeant Ellie Monroe had been called in last minute to provide insight on supply chain delays during a high-stakes military planning session. She was invited by a junior logistics officer who respected her behind-the-scenes knowledge, but nobody else in the room seemed interested in what she had to say. One colonel even leaned back and muttered, "Let the chef stick to recipes." Ellie didn't flinch. She laid the documents on the table and calmly began explaining how kitchen supply routes intersected with medical inventory drops and fuel ration shipments. But every time she tried to make a point, someone interrupted. Every time she offered a solution, someone dismissed it, until the door burst open. A commanding voice rang out, "Is this how we treat a Bronze Star recipient now?" Everyone turned in their seats. A 4-star general, fully decorated, stood in the doorway, and his eyes were locked on Ellie Monroe. "Carry on, Sergeant. I'm here to learn from you." The room fell into stunned silence. The same woman they'd just mocked was now standing taller than ever, as the most powerful man in the room took a seat beside her. What they didn't know was that years ago, in a forward operating base in Afghanistan, Ellie Monroe had done far more than cook. During an ambush that left the communications officer dead and the command post in chaos, Ellie had grabbed the radio and coordinated an emergency medevac under fire. With mortar rounds hitting less than 100 meters from the kitchen tent, she kept her team calm, rationed food and water during a 2-day standoff, and organized field recovery using nothing but scrap maps and gut instinct. She saved 14 lives, but when she returned home, she was assigned back to food services. No press, no welcome parade, just back to the kitchen. That general knew her story because she once saved his son. His son had been one of the soldiers evacuated during that hellish siege, and he'd never stopped telling his father about Sergeant Monroe, the cook who ran a battlefield like a general. So now, as she was being publicly disrespected, he showed up, not as a formality, not as a favor, but to make a point. "You all seem to think combat service ends at the front line," he said, slowly scanning the room. "But wars are won in the kitchens, in the mailrooms, in the tents, where someone like Sergeant Monroe makes sure every soldier eats, lives, and breathes to fight another day." The officers shifted uncomfortably. No one dared speak. Ellie, still calm but now clearly holding back tears, resumed her presentation. But this time everyone listened. She outlined a strategy that cut their supply delays by 40% and rerouted emergency fuel to a struggling base overseas. The colonel who had mocked her nodded silently. The same men who rolled their eyes were now scribbling down notes. By the end of the meeting, the general stood and gave her a slow, respectful salute. "On behalf of every soldier you've ever fed and every life you've ever supported, thank you, Sergeant." And with that, the narrative shattered. No longer was she just a cook. She was the backbone, the lifeline, the silent warrior who'd been winning battles no one saw. Later that week, a formal recommendation was filed to promote her to Chief Logistics Advisor. Not for optics, not for diversity, but because when it mattered most, she had outthought, outfought, and outled every one of them. It's easy to overlook the quiet ones, the ones who wear aprons instead of armor, but sometimes the hands that serve the meals are the same hands that once held bleeding comrades and led men through fire. So the next time someone calls someone just anything, remember Sergeant Monroe. Before we wrap up the story, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? We'd love to hear, because being underestimated doesn't make you small. It makes your rise unforgettable. If this story touched your heart, show your support by liking, commenting, and subscribing to the channel.